As we all know, at some point in our professional life, we will have to give a seminar. Typically, it's on your research, and you may be presenting at a conference, at a symposium, or just in a regular seminar setting. So it's good to have that confidence and that experience in giving a seminar. And that is one reason why I decided to incorporate a presentation as part of this course. I've been getting a lot of questions, well, some questions about how to prepare for the seminar. So I'm putting together this PowerPoint presentation, and hopefully it will be of help. So I've called it Effective Seminar Presentation. Deciding on a seminar topic. So, in your research, you don't have to really decide on a seminar topic per se because you'll be talking about your research. But in this course, what I wanted us to do is to review the intermediates, so to speak, that we have looked at. Of course, as we discussed, just about all reactions or most reactions go through intermediates from products before they get to from reactants before they actually get to to products. These intermediates include, as we all know, radicals and carboanions, carbocations, carbenes, electron deficient nitrogen, and electron deficient oxygens. So most of you already done this, but you need to search the literature, the peer-reviewed literature, and find a paper on one of these intermediates, and that will be the topic that you present on. The presentation will take the format of a Zoom type seminar. So in other words, your classmates will be your audience, of course, along with me, will be your audience, and you will present, you'll share your screen, and we'll tune in by Zoom, and you'll talk over your PowerPoints in your presentation. Your presentation should be about 10 to 15, about 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes in length, allowing for about 3 to 5 minutes for questions. Important, your presentation should take the form of teaching. You should be so comfortable with this information that in presenting it, you're actually teaching it to your audience. So bear that in mind for a good presentation. The first slide that you'll need to prepare is your title slide. Okay, so that's a PowerPoint, which is a title slide. The title should be so crafted that the audience gets a good feel for what will be covered. It takes time to come up with a good title. It has to be concise, very descriptive, and one that's captivating for the audience. A lot of times when we go to seminars and symposia and presentations, we just looked at the title. And if it's not catching enough, we tend not to go to that presentation. So that's the importance of a good title slide. For us, however, in this course, you could use the actual title of the paper, or you could modify that title to describe how you plan to present that information. So that's important. In your title slide, you should also include your name as the presenter. Typically, the institution, the supporting institution, in this case, A&M Commerce, will be there. Of course, since we're talking about the class here, all of us are students here at A&M Commerce, we don't need to put that, but as a practice, it would be nice to just include that. Here's an example of one that I presented a few years ago from my research. So the title here is Ionic Liquid Supported Organocatalyst System for Enantioselective Reactions. As you can see, some choice words that are there, some catchy word, organocatalytic systems, enantioselective. These are words that are part of the title that you want to communicate to your audience that this is interesting. Notice again that it's in bold and right at the top. So that's, you want that to be catching. Again, I have my name right here and the institution right here. I do include my email address. You may want to do that, especially if you're presenting off campus. A lot of times students or members from the audience, they want to contact you for further information that they find interesting in your presentation. The next slide you want to have is your outline slide. This is basically an outline of your presentation. So you want to let the audience know, here's what I'm going to talk about, and that you can get their attention. You may want to consider using bullet points like number 1, number 2, etc. What I have here is an example from, again, one of my old presentations. Notice the first bullet here is the importance of that research, the importance of asymmetric compounds. So again, in your talk, you may want to at least point out the importance of that intermediate that you plan to talk about. And of course, here's some bullet points and things that I plan to touch on. Important here is a section on conclusion. That's typically your last section or second to last section. A conclusion will say more about that, but it's very important because a lot of times the audience, sometimes I should say, audience gets lost, and of course the conclusion kind of brings them all together again. Acknowledgements, you need not put this in, but typically you need to acknowledge the support for that research. Of course, as we all know, research costs money, and that's supported by the university and also outside funding source such as the National Science Foundation, etc. Your introduction slides. So after you have introduced your topic and your outline, your next slide should really be an introduction. Tell the audience really what you will be talking about, and equally important is the background information on this research. So you should include the background information and also the significance. That's a key word in research. What is the significance of this project? Why are we doing it? What's the importance? So always try to include that aspect in your research. As I said, explain to the audience the importance of that research. Next is the results slide. So here you start putting in results from the paper. So it's important. Here you may have a few slides. You may be your most slides right in here. The results. Notice again that you can use ChemDraw to draw out the molecules if you have ChemDraw, or you can feel free to cut and paste diagrams and formulas and tables from the paper. Of course, you just have to give reference or as a footnote to the source of that material. So here you may have your most slides. What I've used over the years is typically one slide per 1.5 minutes or so. So for you, you may have about 10 slides in that range. And see, the next slide is conclusions. So after you've discussed your results and convinced your audience that you have done a good work, here comes the conclusions. Typically bullet points again. And here you may want to circle back to your outline. So again, based on your outline, I'd like to prove A, B, and C. In your conclusion, you want to say, well, gee, I have proven A, B, and C. So you always want to circle back around from your introduction and your outline to the conclusion. I have an example of mine on the next slide here. So you can see here, conclusions. And notice it's typically conclusions because it's typically more than one. So we have here successfully designed. So that means we have designed what we wanted to design and we have synthesized it because that was one of the goals in the outline. So that's, and of course we have some other bullet points here for conclusion. So you can pick your conclusions based on how you presented that information. Of course, you may want to have here a thank you slide just to let the audience know that you're done, because sometimes when folks get to the end of the presentation, we wonder if we need to, if it's concluded or not. But this definitely give the audience a clear indication that you're done with your seminar. And then you may want to follow this with, are there any questions? So we will ask questions, and I'm inviting the members, the classmates, to ask questions. Of course, I'll ask a few, but you ask questions and you provide answers and discussion as we go through. So next I wanted to look at the rubrics. So what I will do, I'll print out a copy of the rubrics that I gave you for each student, and I will be taking notes while you're presenting and of course scoring. So let me just go through this just to give you some pointers what to look out for. In terms of chemical literature and knowledge skills. So in other words, we want to make sure that the presenter here is very knowledgeable and very comfortable with the material. You can see here the most points is 10 to 12. That's the highest points. And exceptional knowledge about the documentation, the chemistry that we'll be talking about, and the benefit of that presentation in general. The next is the presenter did pretty good, valuable contributions in document, and showed some benefits. Notice some benefits. And the next one here is there is a but here, that the presenter included material in the chemistry, but some basic things were lacking. And of course the last category, which is 1 to 3 points, which I'm sure none of us are in that group, but you can see there's no real evidence here of knowledge here. So you can see, as you can tell from grading, most of us here are TAs, and so we grade papers. So you know the easiest ones to grade are typically the A papers, and another easy one to grade is, unfortunately, the paper that's not very good. But in this middle region here is a tough one to make decisions about. Next, communication skills. The presenter showed exceptional organization and effective communication. Notice again, exceptional. And again, I should point out, to be able to get into this category, as we'll see later on, it takes a lot of rehearsals, a lot of preparations, a lot of reorganization of your slides, and that's how you get to that category of exceptional. As you can see, the next category, which is about 7 to 9 points, the presenter was, it was well organized. Notice well organized, but not exceptional. And the presenter communicated effectively about the principal ideas. Going into the last few categories, as you can see here, there were aspects of concern. Aspects of concern did not effectively communicate. And of course, the last category here, there was very poor communication. I'm sure you've been to some seminars before where you get lost. The presenter is there talking, and it's like the presenter is talking to themselves. And that is communicating poor communication skills, because you need to identify your audience and talk to your audience as if you were teaching your audience about the information. So that's an important aspect in your communication skills. Next, content. So the content here, which is basically your PowerPoint slides, it should be clear, It should support your argument. In this case, pick from your paper information that will support that area that you want to talk about. I agree, you may not be able to talk about everything in that paper. Most of you may not be able to talk about everything in that paper, but pick from that paper, emphasize on the intermediates, and develop the information that can support that. There should be sufficient development of arguments. That's for the category 2. And category 3 here, which is 4 to 6 points, is great difficulty in following. So as I mentioned earlier, the audience had great difficulty in following, and typically you can tell at the end if there are no questions. I'm concerned whenever I give a seminar or a lecture, if there are no questions, it means that I did an exceptional job, that I explained it really well, which is kind of unlikely sometimes. But the other aspect is I did not do a good job. Why there are no questions? So typically, as a scientist, we're curious. So typically, there are questions as we present different information. The next one here is preparedness. Just circling back around to how well we're prepared. As we can say, the presenter is obviously confident and it's well rehearsed. So what you may want to do here is, after you've prepared your presentation, you may want to work with a colleague and just run it through by them and get feedback, just to see if they got it, they understand it. And of course, that will develop confidence. So the more you rehearse your material, the more confident you will get in that material. Next, in terms of points, will be not quite prepared, relatively prepared, and somewhat prepared, not prepared. And again, you can tell if a student or presenter is not prepared, it comes across. It comes across. It's very obvious. So it requires plenty rehearsal and that confidence that we have. The next aspect here is visual support. So again, you'll get PowerPoint presentation. One thing about this generation is you guys are very, very good at utilization of the technology. So try and get some real good audio visual as you go through. You may want to get some background graphics as you go through, but you don't have to. As long as you have readable and students and we can follow. And of course, the next category here, the next set of points is effective. Not very effective, but effectively utilized. And of course, the last is ineffective. And of course, that's very obvious. You can see, you'll know when a student or a presenter put together their presentation overnight. It becomes very, very obvious. The next slide here is presentation. So the presenter was very confident. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, confidence here comes from rehearsal. It's presenting in a clear voice and volume. So again, that comes from practice, not rushed. I should point this out again why we put that there is not rushed. What I've seen over the years is that if we have 20 minutes for a presentation, so you plan on a presentation for 20 minutes, you rehearse it and it lasts for 20 minutes exact. When you present that presentation, it's typically less than 20 minutes. Because when you get in front of that audience and you start talking, sometimes you talk a little faster than you typically talk, and time just seems to go by, and before you know it, you're done. So again, that comes from rehearsal and not being rushed. So take your time and work it through and stick to that time limit guideline. The presenter was fairly comfortable. As you can see here, 79 points, fairly comfortable. And it goes down here, as you can see, the last set of points here did not connect. So lost the audience in that presentation. And of course, speaking in monotone voice and just the audience just wants that seminar to get done because they're not following. You don't want to be in that category. The next is discussion. So here you, after you've done, you open up for questions. So here we'll give the largest number of points for the presenter that was very comfortable answering questions. Notice, very comfortable answering questions with detailed information. Detailed. Again, you may not be able to answer all the questions that are asked. You may not have all the information needed to effectively answer all the questions, but as a scientist, you should provide some insight. You should provide some insight. Just saying, I don't have an answer for that, I don't know, that's a good start, but you should follow by giving some insight to let the audience know that you are comfortable with the chemistry and here is a possibility. The presenter was comfortable in answering question, gave reasonable answers, reasonable responses, but not exceptional. Adequate answers here again, and of course did not answer adequately. So again, as you can see, sometimes we answer questions, we all know when that answer is not an adequate answer. And so I think that's all the slides I have here. So this is the last one. So all the best in your preparation. I think that's the most important part, is your preparation, and all the best in your presentation. I have already sent out the schedule, so we'll do half on that Sunday and the other half the following Monday. And watch your time carefully, because if you go over, that means we'll have to stay a much longer period than we had planned on. So I hope this video helps a little bit. I was trying to do my other video using Camtasia, which is a movie type, but that did not quite work out. So hopefully you get some benefit from this video. Okay?